Now, the question is that the motion be agreed to. I would remind members that the next speaker is also making her inaugural speech. The Honourable Jacqui Boydell.
Thank you, Mr President, and may I congratulate you on your recent election. May I also congratulate the Honourable Adele Farina on her election as the Deputy President. I would like to start by acknowledging the staff here in the Chamber and Parliament House. Members may not be aware that I had the privilege of working as a staff member at Parliament House in 2009 and 2010. The staff in this place are just fantastic, and it is one of the most supportive and friendly work environments I have encountered. I look forward to working again with many of those people who were here during that time, and I welcome the new staff to the House. I also acknowledge my family and friends in the gallery and those unable to attend who are watching via the web. It is wonderful to have you here today. My family background has a great significance and meaning to me, as it has defined who I am today and partly the reason why I find myself in this place. My mother arrived at Fremantle Port aboard the ship the Alanice on the 6th of June 1964 as an 18-year-old on a journey of adventure to a country she had never been before and to a family, although related, she had never met before. A brave thing to do, even by today's standards. Well, I can tell you that my mother is a brave woman and a great role model to me, to my daughter, to my nieces, and indeed to many other young women she has met throughout her life. In fact, she and my father have always been generous with their time to both family, friends, people less fortunate than themselves, people more fortunate to themselves, to their community of Carnarvon and the Greater Gascoyne region in general. My mother was born at home on the family property in Northern Ireland on the outskirts of a small town called Rosslea. One of 7 children, although for my mother and her family, 3 of those children would not survive, and they unfortunately died during their early years. My family faced many adverse times during my mother's childhood due to a number of factors: discrimination according to religious background, a lack of freedom, a threat of violence, a lack of opportunity, and of course the economy in general in Northern Ireland at that time was not great, and I'm sorry to say that we see that occurring again at this time. However, you could not hold down the spirit of the Creekans and the Beggins, and there were many joyous times to be had. Stories of my family's history have been retold many times and are a sense of great fun, admiration and inspiration to us all. My mother is a brave and strong woman as a result of her close family ties and a sense of integrity and dignity that they had in themselves in the face of that adversity. My father was born in Subiaco. Although his family were living in Carnarvon at the time, no babies could be born at the Carnarvon Hospital then, so my grandmother had to travel to Perth to deliver her child. The journey via car in 1941 had to be taken over approximately a week. At the age of 2 weeks, my father flew home with his mother in a Tiger Moth aeroplane. The journey was taken over a period of 2 days. The distances travelled and the remoteness of the northwest sometimes seemed daunting, even in 2003, let alone in 1941. These people were truly pioneering, and the region has been built on the back of that pioneering spirit. Interestingly enough, when I was due to have my first child, I too was living in Carnarvon, and I have to say the situation was the same. There was no obstetrician at the Carnarvon Hospital, and therefore the expectation was that I had to leave my family, my friends and my home to have my child in Perth. So in 1994, I found myself in the same situation that my grandmother did some 53 years earlier. My father hails from a hard-working family. My grandparents owned a banana plantation in Carnarvon, and my father grew up there with his 3 brothers. Later in life, and certainly my recollections of my grandparents, was that they owned and operated the first commercial laundry in Carnarvon. In later years, they returned to the plantation business and also ran a nursery. I spent many happy times with my grandmother in the greenhouses of that nursery, She always loved gardening, and to this day, whenever I go into a greenhouse, I feel relaxed as there is a sense of peace and serenity that I felt as a result of the times I spent with her there. My grandfather was also a very community-minded man. He was the founder of the Gascoyne Research Station, he was a Shire Councillor for the Shire of Carnarvon, and he was made a Freeman of the town of Carnarvon in 1991. He loved football and was the trainer of the East Carnarvon Football Club for many years, the only Indigenous club in the Gascoyne region. And to this day, I think he was the only white man actually ever allowed into their club rooms for a long period of time. My father is the oldest of 4 boys, so expectations on him to carry responsibility were there from an early age. I have been extremely lucky in my life to have had close relationships with my extended family. Even though many of them lived overseas, my parents always ensured my brother and I engaged in family goings-on. Through the guidance of my mum and dad, my brother and I are knowledgeable about our family history and have a much defined sense of who we are and where we came from. I think this is so important for children and families to understand where it is that they fit in the world. To me, this is a starting point to base yourself on, and as we all know, without a defined starting point, it is hard to know what direction to take. This became very clear to me when my grandfather, Herbert Day, passed away at 1 a.m. on the 15th of December 1995. The ties of family ran deep for me on that night. My grandfather had been there in the first throes of my father's life. It was a poignant moment for me when his granddaughter, was there in the final throes of his life to comfort him. The legacy he left and the ties that bound us all were crystal clear to me in that moment. I have tried with my own children to teach them the value of the relationships they build within their families and their friends, and how important it is to know your history, so that at the end of the day, you can go forward with a great deal of confidence in who you are. So after arriving in Perth and spending some months here, my mother commenced her trip around Australia and found herself in Carnarvon in 1965. My parents were married on the 12th of February 1966, and I can recall my grandmother telling me that one day my dad came home and told her he was getting married. And she was quite astounded because she had never met his apparent girlfriend at that time. So she asked him, "Well, who to, and what is her name?" To which he replied, "I don't know her name yet, but I am going to marry her." My dad denies this story, but I can tell you it was the start of a great partnership. I was born at the Carnarvon Regional Hospital on the 22nd of February 1968, the youngest child of Tom and Margaret Day. I grew up with my older brother Mark in Carnarvon as part of a busy, young, industrious family. Throughout most of my childhood, my parents owned and operated a transport company called Days Transport. This business started with one truck and my dad as the only driver, servicing the plantations on the banks of the Gascoyne River. Days Transport expanded in 1968 when my parents purchased a transport yard and built a house on the outskirts of town in Boar Street, Carnarvon. The business expanded at a rapid rate, and Days Transport also became the fuel distributors for BP Australia and commenced servicing the outer-lying pastoral stations of the Gascoyne region via a weekly mail run. The first fuel order received was for Yaladi Station and was for 44 drums of fuel. My parents worked hard, and at the time of selling the business in 1984, Days Transport was selling 30 million litres of fuel throughout the wider Gascoyne region. The mailman was a welcome sight on many pastoral stations, as sometimes they could be your only visitor in a week or two, and was a lifeline to the outside world for many supplies. As well as spending time building the family business, my parents were also involved in the local community, with both of them serving on many boards and committees. Both my parents were also heavily involved in my brother and my sporting pursuits, and in my case, my drama pursuits. During this time, my father also served as a Shire Councillor at the Shire of Carnarvon for 10 years. He was also the Shire President from 1989 to 1995, and like his father, was awarded a Freeman of the Town in 1996. All of my parents' pursuits individually have also been family pursuits. It has always been a joint effort. The thing I recall most from my childhood is that my mum and dad took my brother and me everywhere. There was nothing we were not able to attend, including the winning races, the Gascoyne Junction races, cricket matches on the RFDS strip at many different stations throughout the region, camping at Main Roads camps when my dad worked there, and to this day, the sound of a truck at 4 a.m. in the morning loading up for a big trip brings me much comfort. Out on Boar Street, we were a long way from town at that time. The only other people out there were the local Ingada people who lived on our street across the road in camps and makeshift houses. We had the only phone in the street. Well, it wasn't a street really, it was a dirt road actually. I made a lot of friends on that dirt road, one in particular who I'll not name as I don't have her permission to do so. She and I were great friends, however circumstances separated us when I moved to boarding school in my later years of schooling, and our lives took different turns. Mine was filled with opportunity, I'm not sure hers was. But fundamentally, we were the same people when we were young kids at home. She is an Indigenous person, and society definitely dealt her a different hand than it did to me, even though it didn't know me any better than it actually knew her. The endemic negative Indigenous issues we face in our communities are something that I passionately want to change. I am extremely proud of the Indigenous heritage that emanates from the Gascoyne region. I highly regard Indigenous culture and spirituality, and I want to get to the day when all of society understands and values our Indigenous heritage. Boar Street was a long way from school, let alone decision makers in Perth or local members of Parliament. I'm not sure anyone in any authority really thought anything about what was occurring on Boar Street. That is my reflective childhood thought anyway. I attended St Mary's Star of the Sea Catholic School in Carnarvon until I moved as a boarder to St Bridget's College in Lesmurdie to complete my schooling. I also attended the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts to study media journalism. I travelled quite extensively throughout my early 20s, and upon returning from one trip in 1991, I moved home to Carnarvon as I had no job, no money, nowhere to live, so home to mum and dad I went. I later married and had my 3 children whilst living in Carnarvon, although, as I alluded to earlier, my first child, Jackson, was born in Geraldton after a very harrowing RFDS trip. When I made the decision to return to work, I moved into a part-time role with Centrelink in Carnarvon. Well, at that time, it was actually the Department of Social Security. This was a complete eye-opener for me. I had never received income support payments myself and had actually, I'm ashamed to say today, never thought much about people that did. Well, I have to tell you, this was one of the greatest and most rewarding jobs I have ever had. Many people on income support payments are in situations that I would say to any of us here, there, but for the grace of God, go I. I met many fantastic people, some of which I'm still friends with today. When people think of income support, they think of people on unemployment benefits, and somehow mainstream society tends to think people on income support actually choose to be there. But I found in the majority of cases that is simply not the case. Income support and welfare agencies are so much more than that. I visited people who were terminally ill, had just had babies, their family members had just died, people who had been affected by natural disasters, people who through no fault of their own were victims of violent crimes and dysfunctional families, people who had mental health and intellectual disabilities, and also people who just wanted to get their lives back on track. And I can actually say many of them did. There were definitely stressful times, as you would expect, when you're actually dealing with people who are often at their wits' end with no other place to turn. On the whole, most people struggled with their issues every day with an aim to improve their circumstances, and rather than diminish my faith in humanity, it actually increased the degree of inspiration I felt at the actions of many. Many of these people, without opportunities having been provided to them during their childhood, do try and make the most of it and are trying the best they know how to etch out a happy life for themselves and their families, and that, members, is definitely something to aspire to. During my time at Centrelink Carnarvon, I was part of the statewide leadership team that delivered the new family tax benefit policy to Western Australia. Carnarvon office at that time was also delivering support to the communities of Karratha, Port Hedland, Newman and Northern and surrounding districts. I travelled extensively to these areas, and I'm actually really proud to say that I think we changed the service delivery model of income support in a very positive way. The people who work for Centrelink today, or in fact any welfare agency, continue to face difficult circumstances. However, they achieve many great outcomes for the people they aim to assist that unfortunately never get reported by the media, at least. After this period, I worked for the Shire of Carnarvon in local government as manager of the Carnarvon Civic Centre. It was at this time that I became increasingly frustrated with government at all levels. The support of government seemed very remote to me, and I couldn't understand how we had got to the point that we couldn't replace a light in the theatre because there were no funds to do so. But what I knew was that I was trying to deliver a community service with limited funds and a local government that was relentlessly under pressure with no apparent support from state or federal governments at any level. Members may not be aware that I have known the Honourable Colin Holt for some 20 years. In 2007, he visited my home in Carnarvon, and it was during a conversation I had with him about my increasing frustration about the lack of support for my community that he suggested to me that I should meet Brendan Grills and listen to what the Nationals WA had to say about a program called Royalties for Regions. I come from quite a political family, so my involvement in politics goes back to my parents' involvement, as the Honourable Ken Baston will attest to. I have to say, members, that at this time I was very negative about politics and indeed the general concept of government, because I felt I had not witnessed the degree of support that I thought communities above the 26th parallel deserved. This was in fact reflected in many regional towns and communities across the state. In the early 1990s, my mother was actually the divisional president of the Kalgoorlie division for the Liberal Party. My parents had been members of the Liberal Party. However, after a period of disillusionment, their involvement waned, as did mine. Can I also state my mother ran for the seat of Gascoyne for the Nationals under the leadership of Hendy Cowan. Although a hard-fought campaign at that time, the Nationals were not quite ready to be a truly regional party, and they were still quite firmly based in the wheat belt, and it would be some time before that changed. So back to 2007, and Colin Holt suggested to me that I needed to meet Brendan Grills and listen to what he thought Royalties for Regions could do for Carnarvon. I can tell you at that time my response was very negative, and I said, well, who was he and why would I want to do that? I have to say, members, I have very much changed my view since then. It's actually hard for me to imagine now that I would have thought that. I was a very engaged member of my community. I served on volunteer boards. I was across local issues. I knew about local government. I'd worked in local government, but I had never heard of Brendan or Royalties for Regions. It is a testament to Brendan Grills and the Nationals WA that today I think everybody in regional Western Australia knows and understands who the Nationals WA are and what they stand for. I have to say, once I met Brendan, I could not ignore the fact that I thought they were onto something. Once I heard about the concept of royalties for regions, I could not understand why, if you were living in regional WA at that time, you could not vote for the Nationals. To me, there was only one party listening to me, and as I said before, prior to this, Parliament and decision-making was a very long way from my door. But all of a sudden, here it was. My family and I knew this was something we just had to become involved in, and so my father ran for the seat of North West for the Nationals in 2008 against Vince Catania. It was a hard-fought campaign, one which my entire family and friends were involved in. We lost the seat, however we gained much support, and we watched the count for about a week, and as history records, Vince won that seat from my father. There is no doubting that the resonating message of royalties for regions had begun. Obviously, since that time, Vince Catania joined the Nationals WA in 2009, and I have to say he is a great advocate for the people of North West Central, and it is a great pleasure working with him. So 2007 began my interest in believing that someone, somewhere in government, actually believed that where I lived mattered. Prior to that, it really just wasn't happening. Today, I see revived communities across the state of Western Australia as a direct result of royalties for regions and the Nationals in government. When I travel throughout the extensive mining and pastoral electorate, everywhere I go, I see the benefits of royalties for regions. I see how people's lives have been enriched as a result of investment into their communities. There is a definite cultural mind shift in those residents in country towns all across the state. There is a degree of confidence, there is happiness, and there is belief that regional communities will continue to grow and be looked after. That is what I think royalties for regions is really about. It's about the people who choose to live, who choose to work, and who choose to invest their money, their families, and their legacies in those towns that they call home. I can tell you that nowhere I ever came from mattered more than it does now, and I'm very proud of my hometown of Carnarvon, the amazing, intelligent and generous friends I have throughout the region of the North West, and the fact that where we come from finally counts. Can I take this opportunity to thank the Nationals WA State Campaign team? This group of people worked tirelessly to assist all our candidates within our team. As we all know, election campaigns can be stressful. However, the support I received as a candidate was outstanding. I have no doubt in my mind that the success that the Nationals WA achieved at this election was due in no small part to the efforts of those people, and I thank them sincerely. I want in particular to thank the branches of Carnarvon, Karratha, Newman, Esperance, Kalgoorlie and Port Hedland. We had a wonderful campaign throughout the mining and pastoral electorate, all as a result of the hard work of those people. I also wish to thank all of the people who voted for the Nationals WA at the recent election. It is a truly humbling experience to be here representing you today, and I give you my 100% commitment that I will do all that I can to represent you well. I must individually thank the Honourable Martin Aldridge, Mia Davies, Member for Central Wheatbelt, and Claire Creakin for their tireless guidance, incredible professionalism and friendship over the last 5 years. I must single out, however, the Honourable Colin Holt and the Honourable Brendan Grills. These two people are just simply amazing. They have both individually made a massive contribution to the Nationals WA. I thank you for your support to me personally, and I thank you for seeing something in me that at times I wasn't sure was there myself. I and the people of regional Western Australia owe you a debt of great gratitude. Finally, I wish to thank my family, those present here in the chamber and those watching via the web. I can't do this without you. To my children, Jackson, Ben and Sarah, thank you for always committing, although not always understanding. I know it can be tough and really tiresome listening to me talk about politics. What I know now is my children, before they even know it themselves, are working for their communities, trying to achieve something better. And that, I think, is my greatest achievement as their mother. To my brother Mark and his family, Lisa, Liam, Emma, Melissa and Cameron, you are truly great support to me and I love you dearly. Excuse me, members. To my friends at home who've handed out how to vote cards, filled the room for political functions and allowed me to vent, laugh and cry, thank you. To my mum and dad, what can I say? It all began with you. I love you, and this one's for you.